The view from the corner office of Ryland Hart's company was a blur of glass, steel, and ambition. New York stretched out before him like a kingdom he had built with his own hands. From where he stood, nothing seemed out of reach, except maybe sleep, or peace. Or the boy in the tabloid photo his assistant had slipped onto his desk that morning without a word. It was meant to be trash, a casual look who your ex-wife is vacationing with kind of thing. But Ryland had stopped breathing the moment his eyes landed on the kid in the corner of the picture, half obscured by a beach umbrella. The resemblance was uncanny. Wide-set hazel eyes, that sharp jawline, even the tousled dark hair. It wasn't just that the boy looked like him, it was that he looked exactly like Ryland had at that age. He set the photo down, face burning. Logic tried to intervene. His ex-wife, Caroline, had moved to California years ago with her new husband. There was no reason she would have a child who looked like Ryland now. They hadn't spoken in over 8 years. Their marriage had ended in silence, cold as the Manhattan winter, the last fight carved by grief and things neither of them knew how to say. They'd lost a child before they ever really had him. Miscarriage, 10 weeks in. Enough time for Ryland to imagine himself holding a son. Enough time for Caroline to change in ways he couldn't follow. She hadn't had another child during their marriage, of that he was certain. But now there was this boy, this face. Ryland paced his office, tie loosened, jaw tight. It didn't make sense. Unless she hadn't told him, unless she'd gone through with it alone, raised the boy away from his world, his empire, his legacy. The idea clawed at him, furious and tender all at once. He stared out over the skyline. His phone buzzed with another meeting reminder. It could wait. He made the call. "I need you to find out everything about this," he told Lydia, his assistant. "That photo, the boy, where they were, who she's with, I want a name, now." Lydia's pause was brief but telling. She worked with Ryland for over a decade. She knew when something cut deeper than business. "Yes, Mr. Hart." 2 days later, Ryland sat in the back of a black SUV, clutching a manila envelope. His lawyer had advised caution. If this is what you think it is, there are legal implications, custody battles, press. You don't get to show up after 10 years and... "I'm not showing up," Ryland had said tightly. "I'm finding out there's a difference." He tore the envelope open. Inside, photos, documents, a school form with the name Miles D. Thorne printed in uneven block letters at the top. Age 7. Mother Caroline Thorne. Father unknown. The car turned down a winding street lined with orange trees and sun-washed fences. Nothing like Manhattan. Here, everything moved slower. There were no doormen, no urgent texts. Just a child riding his scooter up the sidewalk, hair catching the light. The boy stopped suddenly. Ryland's heart stalled. Miles. He had Caroline's mouth, slightly upturned even in stillness, but the rest was him. All him. His childhood self in motion. It was like looking into a dream he hadn't dared remember. The boy tilted his head, watching the car idle. Ryland couldn't look away. Then the front door opened, and Caroline stepped out. She hadn't changed in the ways that mattered. Same storm-gray eyes, same wariness when she noticed the unfamiliar SUV. She called to the boy. Miles turned back to her, kicked his scooter into the grass, and ran inside. The door closed. Ryland didn't move, couldn't. The ache in his chest wasn't just old love or betrayal or fear, it was something more elemental, something primal. Lydia's voice buzzed in his ear through the earpiece. "She saw you." "I know. She's calling someone." "Let her." "Should I arrange a meeting?" He hesitated. No, not yet. Because if the boy really was his son, this wasn't about confrontation. It was about time, and time couldn't be bought, not even by a man like him. He leaned back, hands folded, as Miles peeked from behind the curtains. Their eyes met. Ryland exhaled, a sound somewhere between wonder and grief. "Just wait," he whispered. "I'm here now." Back in New York, Ryland moved differently. Meetings that once demanded fire and precision now passed with a distant efficiency. He spoke less, watched more. Lydia noticed, so did the board. "You're distracted," one of them said. Ryland didn't answer. He was already booking a flight back to California. Caroline had refused his calls, not rudely, not emotionally, just firmly. "I'm not ready," she had texted once. "You gave up the right to be involved a long time ago." But he hadn't known, not really, not then. And now he couldn't stop thinking about the way Miles had looked at him through the window. Not afraid, not confused, just curious, like something had clicked into place quietly. As if somehow he'd felt it too. It took 3 more weeks for Caroline to agree to meet. They sat at a quiet park bench near her home, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the gravel path. Children's laughter echoed from the swings behind them. "You can't just show up and decide you want to be a father," she said without looking at him. Ryland's hands were clasped tightly between his knees. "I didn't decide, I saw that photo and what, you felt something, that's not how it works. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked in the middle. "Why would you go through that alone?" "I didn't know I was pregnant until after I'd filed for divorce," she said, eyes finally meeting his. "And by then, Ryland, you were gone in every way that mattered." He flinched, but he didn't argue, he couldn't. "I didn't want him to be a part-time footnote in your empire," she continued. "I wanted him to feel like he mattered, not like an obligation or a mistake or something you had to fit in between quarterly reports. You think I wouldn't have loved him. I think you would have tried, but it would have been about you, your redemption, your control, not him." That hurt more than he expected, because it was probably true. But people change. He had changed. "I just want to know him," Ryland said finally. "That's all I'm asking." Caroline was quiet for a long time. Then she reached into her bag and handed him a photo. Miles sitting cross-legged in a messy room building a Lego spaceship. His eyes were bright, focused. He looked like he was inventing a new world. "He's obsessed with planets," she said softly. "Thinks he'll live on Mars one day." Ryland smiled, the weight in his chest lifting, just slightly. "Sounds about right," he said. "Stubborn explorer probably gets that from me." Caroline snorted despite herself. "You always did think you were some kind of pioneer." "I was wrong," he murmured. "I didn't discover anything, I missed it all." She didn't respond. But she didn't walk away, either. And maybe for now that was enough. Ryland Hart didn't know what to do with his hands when he stepped into the playground the following Saturday. The air smelled like sunscreen and wood chips. Parents clustered in shade, watching their kids from benches or picnic tables, coffee cups in hand. It was painfully normal, so unlike the orchestrated world he usually moved through. No polished elevators, no conference room hush. Just the raw noise of children and life and people who hadn't scheduled their weekends to the minute. Caroline stood beside the slide, arms folded, sunglasses tucked into her curls. When she saw him, she didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. That was something. Miles was digging in the sandbox. He hadn't noticed Ryland yet. Ryland cleared his throat gently. "Do I wait here?" Caroline gave him a sideways glance. "No, go say hi." "And if he doesn't?" "Just say hi," she said again, more gently this time. He nodded, walked slowly toward the sandbox, adjusting the collar of his shirt like it mattered here. Miles didn't look up right away. He was deep into something, building a series of connected tunnels with precise scoops of his plastic shovel. His brow furrowed in concentration, mouth slightly open. "Hey there," Ryland said quietly. "That's some serious engineering." The boy looked up. Hazel eyes, familiar and new all at once. There was no recognition, no fear, just curiosity. "Are you Mom's friend?" Ryland blinked. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." "I'm Miles." He wiped his hands on his shorts and extended one, covered in sand. Ryland took it without hesitation. "Ryland, it's nice to meet you, Miles." The boy gave him a measuring look. "You have a weird name, like a dragon or something." Ryland chuckled. "Never thought of it that way." "Do you build stuff?" "Sometimes, not tunnels though, I build companies." Miles tilted his head. "Is that like building rockets?" "Not really," Ryland admitted. "It's more, numbers and ideas." The boy went back to digging. I like rockets better. And just like that, Ryland found himself kneeling in the sand, dress shoes be damned, watching as his son described the perfect base for a Mars colony. Not once did he ask who Ryland really was. Not once did he seem suspicious. He just welcomed him like a new chapter in his book of Saturday afternoons. Caroline watched from a distance, arms still crossed, but her shoulders had dropped. The tension had softened. After a while, Ryland stood, brushing sand off his pants. "Mind if I take him for ice cream sometime?" he asked her. She hesitated but then said, "Ask him." He did. Miles grinned, "Only if they have the blue kind, the one that makes your tongue look crazy." "Deal," Ryland said, already typing a note into his phone like it was the most important meeting of the week. The weeks passed differently after that. They met in public places first, museums, bookshops, the boardwalk. Ryland never pushed, never asked for more time than he was given. He let Miles lead always. He showed up on time, left when asked, remembered the smallest things, like that Miles hated when people chewed gum loudly or that he always double-knotted his laces. Caroline watched him closely, waiting for cracks in the performance, but there weren't any. He wasn't performing. It was as if something had opened in him, something that had been sealed shut for years. His work ethic remained, sure, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. His phone stayed off during their outings. His schedule bent around bedtime stories and science projects. He found himself ordering children's books in bulk. Once, he even missed a board call because Miles had wanted to show him how vinegar and baking soda could make a bottle rocket fly. And when Caroline asked him why he hadn't told his staff to handle it without him, he just shrugged and said, "The board's not going anywhere. But that rocket, that only launches once." She stared at him for a long time after that. They didn't talk about the past much. Ryland knew better than to relitigate what had gone wrong. Caroline had survived years alone, made a home, raised a bright, compassionate child. He wasn't here to rewrite her decisions. He was just trying to build something now, in the space she was finally letting him into. Still, there were quiet moments, little openings. Like the evening he brought over dinner, real food, not delivery, and they sat in her small kitchen after Miles had gone to bed, wine glasses between them. "You used to cook," she said softly. He looked up. When we were first married, before your dad died, before everything got bigger." He nodded. "I remember. You liked that ridiculous lemon pasta." "It was good lemon pasta," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ryland turned the wineglass slowly between his fingers. "I got scared," he said, almost to himself. Caroline looked at him. "After we lost the baby, I didn't know how to show up for you without breaking, so I buried it, worked more, tried to control everything else." She didn't answer, but her eyes stayed on his. "I wasn't ready then," he said, "but I am now, not just for him, for all of it." Caroline's voice was soft. "It's not just about you being ready. I know, I'm just asking for the chance." She stood and took their empty glasses to the sink. "You already have it," she said over her shoulder. "Don't waste it." Miles never asked why Ryland kept showing up. He just accepted him, like kids do when no one has told them they shouldn't. They read books together, built impossible Lego structures, talked about stars and atoms and the weird way cereal gets soggy. Sometimes Ryland would watch him sleep when Caroline let him stay for bedtime. The boy's face, peaceful and trusting, was a kind of absolution. A quiet undoing of every year Ryland had missed, and while he knew he'd never get those years back, he was beginning to understand something deeper. Love wasn't a ledger. It didn't tally, it didn't measure, it just was, here, now, present if he was brave enough to meet it. One afternoon, as they walked through the science center, Miles stopped suddenly beside a mirrored wall. "Look," he said, pointing at their reflection, "we look the same." Ryland froze. Miles tilted his head. "Are you my uncle or something?" Ryland crouched beside him, heart hammering. "No," he said gently, "I'm your dad." Miles blinked. "Like my real dad." Ryland nodded. The boy didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at their reflection again. Then he said, "I kinda thought so." and reached for his hand. They walked the rest of the exhibit without letting go. That night, Caroline stood on the porch as Ryland got ready to leave. "You told him," she said. "I didn't plan to," Ryland admitted. He asked. She nodded slowly. How'd he take it? He said he kinda thought so. A small, surprised laugh escaped her lips. "He's okay," she asked. "Better than me." Caroline looked at him for a long, long moment. Then she stepped back, opened the door, and said, "Come inside." Ryland didn't ask why. He just followed. The night air closed behind him, and something like hope settled deep in his chest. Not certainty, not yet, but something strong enough to build from. The smell of pancakes was the first thing Ryland noticed the next morning. For a brief, disoriented second, he thought he was dreaming. He hadn't woken up to anything other than news alerts or staff meeting texts in over a decade. But here, in Caroline's house, with its warm, creaky floorboards and windows that let in real light, he felt a different kind of morning settle into his bones. Softer, slower. He hadn't meant to stay the night. They'd talked after Miles had gone to bed, about little things, first-grade teachers, sleep routines, favorite books, but woven into it all was something heavier, unspoken, the long pause of years between them. At some point, Caroline had offered him the guest room. Nothing was said beyond that, no expectation, just a door left open. Now, standing barefoot in the hallway, he heard Miles's voice from the kitchen. "Mom, do you think space pancakes would float?" "They'd have to," she replied. "No gravity, remember." "But how would you eat them without syrup flying everywhere?" Ryland stepped into the room. Miles looked up and grinned. "You slept over." Caroline turned around, her expression unreadable. She handed Ryland a mug of coffee. "I made the pancakes," Miles added proudly. "Well, I mixed them. Mom did the hot part." "Sounds like a solid collaboration," Ryland said, taking a sip. They sat together at the small table. No press, no headlines, just mismatched plates and sticky fingers and a boy telling them about Europa, Jupiter's moon, and how he was pretty sure there was life under the ice. Ryland watched him talk, gesturing wildly with his fork. Caroline reached over once to wipe syrup from his cheek, and the boy didn't even flinch. It was the kind of rhythm only time and trust could build. For a moment, Ryland was struck by the enormity of what he'd almost never known. Caroline caught his gaze. "You okay?" she asked, low enough that Miles couldn't hear. He nodded, just taking it in. She didn't press. After breakfast, Miles disappeared into the living room with a stack of space books, leaving the two of them alone again. Caroline rinsed plates. Ryland leaned against the counter, watching her hands move. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this again," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "What?" "This closeness with anyone." She dried her hands slowly. "It's not the same as before." "I know, but maybe that's a good thing." Her eyes lifted to his, steady and quiet. "You mean because now you're different?" "I'm trying to be." Caroline leaned back against the sink, arms folded. "Ryland, I know you've changed, I see it. And it's not just about Miles. You listen now, you're present, you stay. That wasn't you before." He didn't deny it. "But I need you to understand something," she continued. "This isn't just about you proving you're ready, it's about the life we've built without you. Miles and me, we're solid, and I won't let anything shake that, not even good intentions." Ryland took that in, slow and sober. "I don't want to replace anything," he said. "I just want to belong." Caroline's eyes softened for the briefest second. Then she nodded once. "That starts with consistency." Ryland didn't go back to New York that week. He extended his stay quietly, rented a nearby house with a worn porch and a lemon tree in the yard. It was nothing like his penthouse. No concierge, no curated art, no walls of silence, just space, warmth, time. He picked Miles up from school some days, walked him home, helped with spelling words and watched him climb trees in the backyard like it was a sport. He met Caroline's neighbors, people who smiled without calculation and offered baked goods without networking agendas. It was a different planet. One afternoon, Miles sat cross-legged on the porch, watching a line of ants march through the cracks in the wood. "Did you ever live in a house like this when you were a kid?" he asked. Ryland thought for a moment. "Sort of. My grandparents had a place in Maine, big porch, smelled like salt water." "Did you like it?" "I loved it," Ryland said. "It was the only place where things felt quiet." Miles nodded thoughtfully. "This house is quiet too, but not like no-sound quiet, like nice quiet." Ryland looked at him. "Yeah, that kind." Silence fell between them, comfortable and easy. Then Miles asked, "What happened to your dad?" Ryland hesitated. "He died a long time ago." "Oh," the boy's voice was soft. "Were you sad?" "I was for a long time." Miles didn't speak for a moment. Then he slid over and leaned against Ryland's side. "My friend Evan says dads leave sometimes, but I don't think you left." Ryland swallowed the lump in his throat. "I didn't want to." Miles looked up. "But you're here now." And somehow, that simple sentence hit harder than any boardroom confrontation Ryland had ever faced. One evening, Caroline stopped by Ryland's rental house with a container of soup. It was raining, a soft, steady sound against the roof. Miles had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a book open on his chest. Caroline set the soup down in the kitchen. "He wanted to show you the new chapter before bed. I told him you'd read it tomorrow." Ryland glanced at the boy. "He's been reading more than me lately." Caroline smiled faintly. "He does that when he's trying to make sense of big things." "Is he okay?" "He's better than okay. He feels seen." They stood there quiet. Caroline looked around the little house. "You settling in?" Ryland nodded. "Feels more like home than anywhere I've had in years. Even with the broken screen door and the weird smell in the hallway." He grinned, "Especially with those." She leaned against the counter, the light catching in her hair. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if we'd handled things differently?" she asked. Ryland didn't answer right away. "I think about it," he admitted, "but I don't regret ending the marriage, not the way it was. We were both broken." She nodded slowly. "But I regret not checking in, not wondering, not finding out sooner." Caroline exhaled. "I tried to hate you," she said, "for a long time." "You had every right." "I don't anymore." He looked at her, and for a moment the years between them dissolved. Not into romance, not yet, but into something gentler. A kind of understanding that could only come after surviving separately and still finding their way back to the same conversation. "You should stay," she said softly. Ryland's breath caught. "Here." "In California, in his life." His heart beat once hard. "I was hoping you'd say that." Caroline stepped away from the counter. "Then start thinking about what that looks like." And with that, she kissed her sleeping son's forehead, gave Ryland a final look, and walked back into the rain. Ryland stood there long after the door closed. This time, he didn't feel like a visitor. He felt like something was finally, quietly becoming his. The transition didn't happen all at once. Ryland was used to swift decisions, sudden shifts, the sharp angles of corporate life where outcomes came fast and results were everything. But this was different. This was a slow, careful rearranging of priorities, a quiet rebuilding of what it meant to be a father, and maybe, though neither said it yet, something more to Caroline too. He rented a small office in town. Nothing impressive, just a second-floor space above a stationery shop that smelled faintly of ink and paper. He kept working, of course. The company still ran, calls still happened. But now they were quieter, scheduled around school pickups and soccer games and nights when Miles asked him to stay late for one more chapter of A Wrinkle in Time. He stopped flying back and forth altogether. Instead, his team came to him. Lydia visited once a month with binders and updates and her usual sharp gaze, only now she asked about Miles first, business second. "You're happier here," she said once, scanning the little whiteboard in his office with Miles's doodles along the edges. Ryland glanced at the drawing, a rocket ship labeled Dad's Work. He smiled. "Yeah, I am. It's obvious you've slowed down." "I needed to." "You did," she agreed, "but I think the company needed it too." That surprised him. She raised an eyebrow. Turns out, when you lead from something other than exhaustion and ego, people want to follow you more. He laughed, but it caught in his throat, because she was right. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was just trying to be in the room, in the moment, in his son's life. Miles had a science fair in late March. It was in the school gym, all poster boards and baking soda volcanoes and nervous parents hovering just out of frame. Ryland arrived early, coffee in one hand, a list of questions in the other. He took the involved parent role with the same dedication he once brought to boardrooms. When Miles saw him, his face lit up with a grin that didn't need explanation. His project was a scale model of the solar system, complete with painted foam planets and handwritten facts under each one. Ryland had helped him hang tiny paper moons around Jupiter, carefully threading fishing line through a metal coat hanger. Caroline arrived a few minutes later, balancing a container of snacks and a folded chair. She smiled at Ryland, brushing wind from her cheeks, and took a spot beside him as Miles launched into his explanation about planetary atmospheres. They stood there shoulder to shoulder, both smiling, both listening, both marveling. Later, as parents wandered the gym and judges made their rounds, Ryland leaned in close. "He's extraordinary." Caroline looked at him. "Yeah, he really is." There was something warm in her voice that hadn't been there before, not just trust, not just respect, something that sounded faintly like pride. "Thanks for letting me be part of it," he said. Caroline turned to him, searching his face. "You're not a part of it, Ryland, you're in it all the way." He didn't say anything, but he felt it, low in his chest. That quiet blooming of something deeper, something earned. They started spending time together after Miles went to bed. Not every night, not with any label, but Ryland would come by with groceries or wine or takeout, and Caroline would let the conversation stretch past dinner. They talked about everything: books, politics, regrets, the people they used to be. Sometimes they sat in silence, comfortable now in the way long familiarity allows. One night, after watching an old black-and-white film on her laptop with their feet tangled on the couch, Caroline rested her head on his shoulder. "You know," she said, voice low, "I used to wonder if you ever thought about the child we lost." Ryland turned to her, startled. "Every day." She looked up at him. "Why didn't you say anything back then?" "I didn't know how. I was so angry and scared. And I thought if I buried it, if I just kept building things, it would stop hurting." "It didn't, though." "No," he said quietly. "It just got quieter, until I didn't recognize myself anymore." Caroline's hand slipped into his. "You're not that man now." He held her hand tighter. "No," he said, "I'm not." Spring came slowly to their town. Rainy afternoons, blooming trees, muddy yards. Ryland had never cared about seasons before. He didn't notice the passage of time the way he did now, marking it with soccer schedules and book fairs and the first time Miles rode a bike without help. That day Ryland had run alongside him, breathless, as the training wheels lifted and the bike swayed forward on its own. Miles had laughed, triumphant, as Ryland slowed and clapped from behind. Caroline had watched from the porch, her eyes shining. Later that night, after Miles had gone to sleep early from exhaustion, Ryland stayed to help clean up dinner. As he dried the dishes, Caroline leaned against the counter and said, "I don't know what we're doing." He turned to her. "What do you mean?" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely between them. "Us. It's not what it was, and it's not just co-parenting." Ryland set the towel down slowly. "I know." She looked at him. "And you're not pushing me, not trying to make it something it's not. I appreciate that." "I'm not here to fix anything," he said. "I'm just here for however long you want me to be." Caroline stepped closer. "And if I want you to stay?" He met her eyes. "Then I stay." She kissed him then, softly, not with heat but with something deeper, something tentative and real, a beginning, not a conclusion. When she pulled back, she didn't let go of his hand. "Stay tonight," she whispered. He didn't answer with words. That summer they took a road trip. Not far, just up the coast to a rental cabin near the redwoods. No cell reception, no agenda, Just the three of them, a stack of books and days measured in hikes and pancakes and fireflies. One night they sat outside under a blanket, Miles asleep inside. The sky was impossibly wide. "You ever think this is fate?" Caroline asked, her voice low. Ryland tilted his head. "All the years apart, all the things we didn't say, and then this." He looked at her, at the stars reflected in her eyes, at the way she'd softened without losing any of her fire. "I didn't believe in fate," he said. She smiled, not even a little. "Not until I met a kid who looked exactly like me, digging a tunnel in a sandbox like it was the most important thing in the universe." Caroline leaned into him. "Then I guess we're both believers now." By the time fall settled into California with its dry leaves and crisp evenings, the shape of Ryland's life had changed completely. He sold the Manhattan penthouse. Quietly, without ceremony, he signed away the high-rise address that had once symbolized everything he thought success was. There was no announcement, no press release, just a simple handover and a one-way flight back to the only place that mattered now. He didn't feel smaller for it, he felt free. His company adapted. With a leaner leadership team and his presence rooted on the West Coast, the structure evolved. Lydia stepped into a larger role, thriving in it. He attended only the meetings that mattered. He spent mornings with Miles and evenings cooking dinner with Caroline, chopping vegetables while she leaned against the fridge reading aloud whatever Miles had left on the table, space trivia, book reports, jokes scribbled on napkins. The change wasn't abrupt, it didn't rewrite the past, but it laid something steadier for the future. One Saturday in late October, they hosted a small backyard gathering. Nothing big. Just a few neighbors, a table of apple cider, and Miles dressed as an astronaut, darting between folding chairs with a paper jetpack on his back. Caroline moved through the yard with a kind of ease Ryland hadn't seen in her before, hair up, sweatshirt sleeves rolled, eyes catching the last of the golden light. She laughed with one of the moms from school, then caught Ryland's gaze across the yard. He couldn't help smiling. Later, after the guests had left and the yard was quiet again, they sat together on the back steps, Miles inside watching a movie. Caroline rested her head on his shoulder. "You've built a good life here," she said. Ryland looked out at the grass, at the half-collapsed rocket ship made from cardboard boxes and duct tape. "We did." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know he's been asking to change his last name." Ryland turned to her. "I told him to take his time," she said, "but he asked what it would mean if he had your name too." Ryland swallowed. "What did you tell him?" "That names matter less than actions. That who you show up as every day means more than what's printed on a form." He nodded. "That's true. But I also told him," she added, "that your name means safety to him now. That it means bedtime stories and bike rides and science experiments. That it means showing up." His throat tightened. "You okay with that?" Caroline looked at him, eyes steady and soft. "I am." Inside, Miles's laughter rose from the living room. Ryland breathed out slowly. "He's everything I didn't know I needed." She smiled. "He's everything I knew I needed. I just didn't know if we'd ever find someone who saw him the way I did." Ryland reached for her hand. "You're still the bravest person I've ever known." She leaned into him, their fingers entwined. They stayed like that until the sky dimmed to a rich velvet, until the porch light flickered on, casting soft halos around them. Eventually, Caroline stood and stretched. "I should get him to bed." Ryland stood too. "Want help?" She turned back to him, her smile faint and full. "Always." That night, as Ryland tucked Miles in, the boy pulled the covers up to his chin and looked at him with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Dad." Ryland still felt the pull in his chest every time the boy said it, still felt the weight and wonder of the word. "Yeah." "Do you think stars miss each other when they go out?" Ryland sat down beside him. "Maybe, but I think the light they gave off still matters, even after they're gone." Miles was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You and Mom are kind of like stars." "How do you mean?" "You were apart, but now you're shining again, together." Ryland smoothed a hand over his hair. "That's a beautiful way to put it." Miles yawned. I'm glad you came back. I'm glad I found you. When the boy drifted off, Ryland stayed a moment longer, watching him sleep. Then he rose, turned off the light, and closed the door gently behind him. In the weeks that followed, they moved naturally toward something permanent. Not dramatic, not declared, but real. Caroline didn't need grand gestures, she needed consistency. And Ryland gave it, not because he had something to prove, but because he'd finally learned what love really was. It wasn't flashy, it didn't come in sweeping speeches or big finales. It was in the way he remembered her favorite kind of tea, in the way she left a note in his work bag when he flew out for a single-day meeting, in the quiet touches, the late-night laughter, the long looks across the dinner table when Miles was too busy talking about comets to notice. One evening, just before winter settled in, they sat together under the stars again, this time wrapped in a single blanket, a fire pit between them, Miles asleep inside. Ryland held her hand. "Do you ever think we were always going to end up here?" he asked. Caroline thought for a long moment. Then, "No, I think we could have missed it." "But we didn't." "No," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "We didn't." They watched the sky in silence, the fire crackling low, their breath curling in the cold. And in that quiet, Ryland finally understood. Fate wasn't something written in the stars. It wasn't an inevitable path. It was the moments you chose to return, the people you fought to show up for, the child you didn't know you had who changed everything. He'd spent his whole life building empires, chasing meaning in skyscrapers and success. But in the end, it was a boy with his eyes, and a woman with her arms folded and unspoken forgiveness in her chest who gave him something far rarer. A home. And this time he stayed.